Recovery Sort Of is a podcast where we discuss recovery topics from the perspective of people living in long-term recovery. This podcast does not intend to represent the views of any particular group, organization, or fellowship. The attitudes expressed are solely the opinion of its contributors. Be advised, there may be strong language or topics of an adult nature.
Welcome back. It's Recovery Sort Of. I am Jason, a guy who isn't going to tell anybody not to talk.
And I'm Billy. I'm a person in long-term recovery.
And we're here to talk about a very kind of interesting topic that sort of came up a long time ago and we weren't so sure we wanted to do, but now we're going to do it anyway. And the idea of, if there's an appropriate time or way to ask people to stop talking in meetings.
Yeah.
Basically, just real quick, couple pieces of recap. The topic people would like to hear more about, another person said MAT and its place in recovery, which I thought was an interesting way to say it. And we keep getting this MAT idea or somebody that's on MATs and has been successfully for a while, and we are working on making that happen. I would give credit to the person who sent that in, but it's a bunch of letters and numbers that I can't read. So, and we got one other message from Pete. He said, "Greetings from England. He's an addict named Pete and wanted to thank us for our show. It's helped reassure me of the humanness of recovery. I love NA and I'm 8 years clean. You've expressed, discussed, and explored a lot of questions that I have with members. Nice to feel less alone. I write and express with poetry. The last thing I ever saw myself doing whilst wishing to be clean. Creatives, for want of a better word, and performers in recovery seem to gel together, and I have tried to include many in performing and writing, because I only ever performed for judges or probation officers. I remember thinking performers in the rooms were so distant from anything I could ever be and feared talking to them. I wondered what your views on artists, singers, performers in recovery might be. Keep up the great work. Love and hugs." So thank you, Pete, and I thought that was pretty fascinating. Something you don't necessarily think of too often, but
Yeah, and I've had some friends over the years, guys that play guitar seems to be the big thing that, how do you continue to play music and do that? Obviously, most of that happens in bars or clubs or events where people are drinking and having a good time. And yeah, how do you stay connected to that?
yeah, well, and I would imagine that at least I can remember this for me, and I feel like it was a bigger thing when I was going through it, but this idea that I'm way more creative and free to express myself when I'm high. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that was always a thing. Like, people can't push through that self inner critic talk to even get to the creative place when you're not. And so, yeah, that's a difficult one, right? How do you do that? And the interesting thing is, so a guy that I know, I consider a friend, actually was part of opening a specific rehabilitation center that is specific for performers. So I'm wondering if maybe having him on, we could talk about this whole topic.
That might be good.
Yeah, I'm going to reach out to him and see if he'll come on in the future. And
yeah, he realize like some challenges, and I'm sure he's thought a lot about it, sounds like.
He is a performer himself. I think he had something to do with The Wire at one point, and he's put out a CD. So, yeah. Should be interesting. I'll reach out and see if I can get him on here. So back to today, and this topic sort of came from an experience you had. So I'm going to let you maybe describe as much of the experience as is safe or comfortable for the public.
Yeah, and of course I'm going to say lots of different reasons to consider asking people to stop talking in meetings. I mean, we've all heard different people go on, whatever, religious tangents or tangents about some book or something that they read or some therapy thing that they're doing that's sort of an outside issue, and that's one thing. This particular case is a guy that I've known for a while. He's had been around meetings for over a year, so he had a lot of connections here, had made a lot of friends, had a lot of relationships here. And then he had a relapse. And since it's relapse, he's not really been able to put any consistent amount of days together. But he's still going to meetings fairly regularly, at least 3 or 4 a week from what I can tell. And he's drunk, like drunk in the meetings, and you can kind of tell. You could probably kind of tell if you didn't even know him, but the fact that I know him so well, it's obvious, that he's acting very differently. And so this has been going on for a couple of months now. And the interesting part for me was I tend to think no one will ever fucking want to come to a meeting when they're high or drunk. I'm like, that would be the last place I would ever want to come. Yeah, it's like, why would I want to come sit in this meeting, and be around straight people when I'm fucked up? Like, that sounds crazy. But
sounds boring.
Yeah, it's like, why would you want to do that? But anyway, I guess to each his own. And we were talking with some friends of ours about this recently, and he was sharing with us that he had done the same thing. He's been clean now a while, but he had done the same thing. He had a relapse, and he was still coming to meetings and getting high, like in the parking lot right before the meetings.
Wow.
And one thing he said that I had never thought about was he had built all these relationships over his time coming in that were like all these like good, healthy people, and they were like honest, and they were these good relationships. And then now this guy was doing heroin, so it might have been a little different than the guy that's drinking. I don't know. But he said, the people that he was dealing with when he was using were all like the fucking shady characters that we're used to when you're, people that you don't necessarily like. They're liars or thieves. It's just all the people that are in chaotic use and what they bring. And that he loved having these relationships with these like fun, stable people, but he just wanted to be high.
Huh.
So that's why he had done it. And I was like, that doesn't outweigh for me the awkwardness of trying to be high around straight people.
Well, and I guess for me, telling that story, which is a fascinating story, because my initial reaction was, obviously you're not alone feeling like you would not want to be high and go to a meeting, because we don't see it too often. Like, it's not the norm.
Right.
So obviously there's a whole lot of people who don't want to be at a meeting once they get high, right? I would think a lot of people agree.
Yeah.
But the second piece of the story really makes me think, well, fuck, man, this is my problem with us not being more inclusive, right? I mean, that guy literally wanted to be around the type of people that were in recovery. And I guess for whatever reason, I don't know if he was still using heroin at this point or if it had switched drugs and was using something else. But I don't know, the fact that he wants to be around, why can't he?
Yeah.
That bothers me a little. Well,
I think he can. I mean, the guy that's coming drunk, and my wife shares it when she tells her story, of recovery. She would say, like, I went to meetings drunk, I went to meetings high, no one ever kicked me out. No, they always just told me to keep coming back, and that part I think is, I don't want to say universally agreed upon, but for the most part, that's universally, hey, if you're high, you can come, welcome, this is where you need to be. Some meetings have different things that they'll say in the beginning of the meeting. We want you, if you have drugs or paraphernalia, take them outside. We want you and not your drugs. And that's more for the risk of the meeting place and the legal ramifications. And that probably goes back to the 50s. Like nowadays, I don't know if that's as big a deal, but it could be a trigger for people if you have drugs and stuff on you, or you drop your fucking bag of weed on the floor.
I tried to
that
get
could be
that
a trigger.
Yeah, it could, but I tried to get that taken out of one of my home groups readings, and they were like, why? I was like, because I've been here for like 15 years and nobody's ever fucking left and took their drugs outside and come back in.
Not one person has ever got
up
and
we're
walked
wasting
outside.
our fucking time. But I had another fellow home group member that had a lot of time in recovery too, and they said, yeah, but I think it sets the tone and lets people know that we're serious about our program. Yeah. And I was like, okay, I'll
that
buy
it's
into
about
that.
abstinence.
Right.
Yeah,
I wasn't totally bought in, but I was like, that sounds fucking good enough for me.
Yeah,
I'm like, cool.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we had one meeting up here for a long time that said, if you have any drugs, paraphernalia, or weapons, please take them outside.
Ooh.
And that was because they had an incident at the home group. It was a lady there, and she was a little mentally unstable. And she had come in and had some anger issues or resentment issues at somebody. And she came in and I guess pulled a gun out and like laid it on the table and kind of did one of those, dared some people to say some shit to her or to say whatever she thought they were saying behind her back or something like that.
Well, damn.
But she had actually, so that in their format, they put, if you have any drugs, paraphernalia, or weapons, please take them.
I mean, I would keep the weapons one, even if we got rid of the drugs one. Like, it seems safe to me. Now, I mean, it was like a month ago. 2 people got shot in a meeting in Florida. Did you hear about that?
Oh, I didn't hear about that. Wow.
Oh, yeah. So I think what I got after the, actual news story was that maybe it was like a jealous ex-boyfriend, and he went in and shot the new boyfriend and the girl and killed them both. I know. Oof. And I think himself, too. Like, I think it was all 3.
Yeah, I guess that's going to happen.
Yeah, but it's just not one you hear about often. Like, usually 12-step meetings aren't... It might happen in a parking lot, but not in the meeting. Right. Damn.
Yeah. But in any case, so this guy, my friend, has been coming to meetings, and again, I've always been of the thing, hey, keep coming, man. It doesn't, whether you use today or not, just keep coming. That's what's most important.
Oh, can we go back to that? Because I forgot to address that part of it. So, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think we're ever saying for people not to come back at all. I'm just picturing somebody. So, try to think back to when you were like somewhere in your first 5 years of recovery. And you got a guy that hangs out in your network, whatever you guys do in your first 5 years, hanging out, going to meetings together, whatever. And he uses, but still wants to be part of that group. He's not going to be okay. He's going to be looked down on if he comes out and gives up his clean time or whatever and gets honest. Whereas I wish there was the ability for him to just be like, guys, look, I drank. I still really want to hang out. I still feel like I'm recovering. Drinking's working for me right now. Whatever. Just if he could be authentic and real in that. And I don't think there's any room for that because he will be treated different. Either there's going to be people who just treat him different because, well, he's fucking using. He's not working our program anymore. But there's other people who are going to say, that's just dangerous. I can't be around that. Now I can't help him anymore.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people are going to say that. And I'm like,
the fear of the dangers.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's just, I'm like, that's disappointing because that guy you described who was like, I really like the people, we were the perfect place for him to be able to keep coming and be authentic and just say, look, this is what I did. This is what I'm going to do for now.
Well, for me, and this gets more to the heart of this issue is, so this guy's coming to meetings and he's sharing at every meeting and like doing readings and like slurring his words. Like it's pretty bad, and not only that, but he was in a meeting, that I was at, and he shared a bunch of things, and I know him really well, over his time clean, and he shared a bunch of stuff that isn't what he thinks or believes at all. It was a bunch of just sort of drunken, regurgitated things he thought were the right things to say in a meeting. So he wasn't really being his authentic self.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was something else. And I don't know, I don't know if that's helpful to him, to do that. And I don't know if it's helpful to anyone else in the meeting for him to be doing that, when we're supposed to be this atmosphere of recovery and whatever, clean, sober, whatever words you want to use. And so it's not the fact that I don't think he should come, because I certainly think he should come, but it's almost like when he comes in now, he's going to share in the meeting, and that's fucking awkward.
Right.
It's very awkward.
So does everybody know?
The few people that I know personally that we've talked about it, yes, they all know. I mean, I hate to say it's like he's not falling down drunk, but he's talking in very slurred speech and like I say, makes a point to try to read readings or talk or, whereas if you just sit quietly, no one would probably know.
I'm not going to lie, and I feel like a really good human for this, so I'm definitely going to brag about it a little. The first thought that comes to my mind right now is he driving back and forth to meetings? Maybe one of you guys should offer to give a ride.
Yesterday. Yeah, I just thought about that yesterday. I thought, holy shit, he's probably driving to meetings.
Yeah. Like, I'm wondering if
That
one
didn't
of
even
these,
cross my mind.
I'm like, man, maybe one of these seasoned members should offer to pick him up each week. So he's safer.
Well, let me back up just a minute and tell you my thought process for all this, because we started to talk about it this way, and then I got off track. So he's been coming to meetings. He relapsed, and he was out for a couple of months, and he went through some pretty chaotic use, and things were pretty bad, and he got all the way to sort of homeless and whatever. And it was a couple of months where he wasn't coming to meetings at all. Then he reached out to me and some other of our friends and said, he wanted to come back to meetings. And so then he started coming back to meetings, and it's been this most recent couple months where occasionally he'll call, I'll go pick him up, we'll go to meetings together or whatever, or I'll see him at a lot of meetings. But he would talk and be all kind of like, quote unquote, weird, like different. And I'm like, I think he might have pickled his brain the last time he used, because I'm sure I know I've seen over the years people that like relapse. And then when they come back, like there's noticeable impairment from the person that they used to be to the person that they are now. From long periods of fucking chaotic use of any substance, man, it can mess your brain up.
Well, I think it's more than just the substance itself, too, just the whole way of life. And I mean, it can really, like, we talk about how we live at an animalistic level. And, some of that comparison, I think, bothers me. But the idea that, like, we do get really soaked into this one purpose living, right? It's just about getting ways and means to get more drugs, to feel okay.
Yeah, and there's a certain antisocial piece that comes along with that way of life.
Yes. Which might be more from our society than just a natural byproduct of drug use. And that's something that's kind of fascinating to me. I always assumed that was just, oh, yeah, you use drugs, you want to be away from everybody. But I'm wondering if that's what I'm seeing with, like, NA, with kind of the shame piece.
Yeah. Is it the chicken or the egg? Like, do we become antisocial because we've been pushed out of society? So it's like, fuck them. I'm going to do what I want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's been coming back to meetings and sharing and talking. And when I talk to him, like he's called me on the phone a few times, we talk, and I have just assumed that he's clean, or sober, whatever word you want to use, and that he's just
weird.
Yeah, now he's just weird. Now he's just different because of some, and I keep thinking, man, if he would just stay clean a little while, some of that I think comes back, for some people. If they get clean, especially, what we see with the crystal meth, the methamphetamines, like that shit. Yeah, that shit really messes people up. But in any case, I have just given them the benefit of the doubt. And my approach to most of these situations, and not to get too far off the track, but it's like people that are on like a maintenance program or anything else. Like my opinion with most of that has always been, if they're not talking to me about it and we're not having an intimate conversation one-on-one about what they think my opinion is, then I don't give a fuck. If you say you're clean, and I can have my thoughts and opinions and like, oh, I think that person's fucked up, but I'm not going to care. You know what I mean? For the most part, you want to celebrate, you want to do whatever, like that's your shit. That's not my shit to decide. And so if he comes in and tells me that he's clean and that he wants to be here and that he's doing good, like that's what he says a lot. Oh yeah, I'm doing really good, I'm hitting lots of meetings, things are going really good.
I mean, compared to 2 months ago, he's not lying.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, I've heard some other stuff that it's not So in any case, I've just given him the benefit of the doubt. And then in talking with some other friends, they're like, dude, you're fucking crazy, like he's totally drunk. And I'm like, I don't know. Maybe he's not. And they're like, no, he's fucking drunk. So then or a couple of days ago now, he actually called me on the phone and said, hey, I wanted to let you know, like things really haven't been going good. It's really been going really, really bad. I'm like on the doorstep of being homeless again. And I've been drunk in these meetings. I don't know if you've known. I said, well, kind of, but whatever. And he's like, and I keep going to meetings and I keep like sharing and trying to say what I think people want to hear because I want to help people. And, I don't want people to do what I'm doing. And he was drunk then too. So it was a bunch of drunk talk as well. And we talked about getting into treatment or whatever else. But part of that conversation, he says, well, if you've known, why don't you say anything? I'm like, well, it's not my place to call you out on stuff. I want you to feel welcome in the meeting.
Right.
I don't want to be a person that tries to throw like guilt or shame or any of that on, to you to push you away. Like, I want you to come, and it doesn't matter to me if you're drunk or not. If you're showing up and you're here, like, hopefully, you'll get the message or you'll find what you're looking for. Like, that's what I keep telling them. Like, I just want you to find what you're looking for that's going to help you and that what you want out of life. But he was like, oh, no, I think, you should call me out on this and you should shut me down in the meetings. And I was just like, oh, I don't know about that. Plus, he was drunk. So if I did that and he was drunk another time, it might lead to a fight.
Right. Wow, yeah. Which guy shows up drunk that night? Is it happy drunk 12-step guy, or is it bitter drunk, I'm going to whip your ass for saying something guy? Yeah, that's such a weird thing that it's almost like he's arguing with you to do this thing.
Well, and I mean, I'm sure you've been to enough meetings over the years and whatever. Like, there's been always those cases where people show up and they share and they're intoxicated, and you can kind of tell, you kind of know. But in my history of all that, 99% of those times, the people share for a couple minutes. It's fucking completely awkward and uncomfortable, and then they just stop talking.
Right.
And usually they don't keep coming to meetings. Like, usually it's once or maybe a handful of times, and then you never see them again. This has been months, and it's a couple of meetings a week. And like I say, he shares at every meeting. So it's like, what I've never been a person to shut someone down in a meeting. I've never done that. I've came close a couple of times to really kind of trying to protect the integrity of recovery and the integrity of the meeting, but I've never actually done it.
So it's interesting that I feel like we come in with these topics like, should you shut people down in a meeting or not? And instead of coming to that answer, we come to like 48 other different conclusions. And I'm like, it's fascinating. But the first thing that came to my mind when you said about this phone call of him calling you, it's almost like he's looking for this reaction for people to push him away. Right? Like, that's what he's been conditioned to in his life, is like, he shows up, he's this drunk asshole, and people disconnect from him and push him out of their life and isolate him off, on the sides of society. And I think your response actually was beautiful, because it's almost like he's showing up and not getting that response, and he's like, what the fuck, man? Why aren't these people dissing me? Right. And then you're like, nah, man, we just want you here. Like, we just want to love you. We don't care. And that's like, damn, that might have been exactly what he fucking needed.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. It just came across as pretty powerful to me. Maybe it didn't feel that powerful for you in the moment, but it seemed like it.
No, but thank you.
Yeah. I don't know. It makes me think of so many different things. So, in general, I think the only thing the Narcotics Anonymous specific literature that I know of, at least, has to say about this topic is in the group booklet, which, if you don't know what the group booklet is, it's not quite a pamphlet. It's like a small booklet that is supposed to, describe how home groups should operate for the most part. And it goes through a list of positions like the secretary and the treasurer and all that, and, what you're looking for this person to have. And then it says there's other positions outside of that. One, they call it the leader, and it says also called the chairperson in different areas. But the statement it makes is, the person leading the meeting is responsible for establishing an atmosphere of recovery. Although sharing problems is necessary for identification, sharing solutions is necessary for recovery. It should always be in the leader's mind that we are here for the specific purpose of staying clean and helping other addicts to find recovery from addiction. So I feel like, in my mind, this is the statement I always use to justify being whatever, trying to follow rules or traditions or whatever I was saying I was doing for most of my time in recovery. Like, if you're sharing a hot mess, that doesn't feel like it's conducive to leading this meeting in the topic of spiritual principles and recovery life, then, I subjectively get to decide that and tell you to shut the fuck up. Right. I mean, I could see how it could be used to justify that easily.
Yeah, and I guess I've seen meetings try to accomplish that in different. The 5-minute timer for me is always like, well, that's really what that is. That's just a way of keeping things on task. If anybody's too off track, you know.
Oh, you've been 5
Timer
minutes.
goes off 5 minutes, shut it down.
Yeah. No, that's exactly. And I feel like, so I had a home group that actually I had saw that method in another group and brought it back to my home group, and we implemented it. We had a 5-minute sign, and, you know, the secretary or the chairperson was supposed to time that. And yeah, that, to me, it was the most polite way for people who, A, are either not talking about things conducive to recovery, or B, they're just going too long, right? Like either
and
way.
even that always seems
Reset.
subjective. Like the time 5 minutes was always like up to the, at least in a lot of the ones I've been in. Like if it's somebody you like or a friend of yours, you kind of shut the timer off real fast. If it's somebody you don't like or they're sharing a big mess, you know, might be a little louder or let it go a little longer till they stop talking.
Yeah, I think so. I had to be the chairperson or whatever, or the secretary, whatever you like to call it, at one point. And the way I would do it was, honestly, if it felt like engaging, if somebody went 6, 7, 8 minutes, but you're still talking about a relevant issue and still making a point, I'm not saying shit.
Yeah.
If you're talking nonsense, you're getting the fucking timer. Like,
right.
And I really didn't use it much. I didn't want to.
Right.
I tried to kind of get people's attention more of like one-on-one while they're talking, make some eye contact, make the little watch thing, you know, the little 5, whatever. But I do think there's times, especially like when the meeting had run over the hour and I was done, I was like, yeah, it's time for the sign. I'm holding this bad boy up. But yeah, I mean, I do think that's one of the more pleasant ways. Yeah. And also, overall, time sharing wise, I think that's really the way to go.
Oh, yeah. Now, have you ever like shut someone down for topic wise, like for what they were saying or what they were?
God, I feel like
context?
I have.
Yeah.
I feel like I have, but I don't remember any specific incident. But yeah, man, like just, I've always tried to do it nicely, like to walk over to them and just kind of whisper to them, like, hey, let's go outside and talk or something like that. But even that, I've seen not get a great response when other people have done it in meetings over time, you know, where the person, like, they whisper quietly to the guy, like, hey, you know, do you want to go outside and talk? And the person's like, shut the fuck up. Why are you talking to me while I'm sharing or something? Like, whoa, right. Okay. Yeah, I don't want none of that. So,
yeah, no. And so I tend to not want to lead the meeting, and I always get mixed up with the words. Is it secretary or chair? Like, who's the person that sits up at the front?
So
that's always
according to this book,
yes,
the secretary is also known as the leader, and they're the person that sits up front.
Okay.
But I'm sorry, that's the chairperson and the leader.
So the chairperson is the person that sits up front and runs. I always get those words mixed up, and we don't even use those positions in those ways.
Well, we use them different around here. Like for us, secretary is the person who sits up front of the meeting and gets speakers usually, and then the speaker is usually the chairperson. So I don't.
Yeah, that's why I'm always confused. Yeah, anyway, I don't like to personally sit up and run. And all of this goes back to one of those, like I had a sponsor early on that told me one time, that is a service position. One, when you're sitting up there, you shouldn't be sharing from that position because you are in a service position at that point, and your job is to be running the meeting and taking care of all of that stuff, not sharing your own personal shit. The other thing is that gives a weird possible leadership role to that person that's sitting up front, you know. So anyway, and that always just stuck in my head, like, oh, okay, if that's what you say, then that's the way it is, and now that's just the way that I do it.
Right.
And I tend to go to meetings, I don't want to say with the intention of sharing, because there's plenty of meetings that I don't share at, but I don't like to not give myself that ability either.
So one of my first sponsors, I think it was my first sponsor, told me that too, but his workaround was if you really felt you needed to share at that meeting, you got up and leave that position and sit in the audience and share and then go back up, which I thought was fair enough, I guess, at that point in time. I think over time, I generally have adopted, like you said, like I heard it once and it seemed legit, so I went with it. Not that I haven't ever done it, but I've probably tried to keep it like short.
Yeah. And because I've been at my home group where there's like 5 people in the meeting. So then it's different. You know, it's like, well, now we're just trying to fill up the hour.
Right.
So everybody's getting a turn today.
So apparently there's not much official NA stance on what would constitute shutting down a share or not. And you know, Caroline had mentioned this topic. She hasn't been on for a while. She actually will be on soon, but she had mentioned this a long time ago. Like, when is it okay? Like, as a topic, when do you shut down somebody in a meeting? Is it because they're high? Is it because they're talking about a certain thing? Like, when is it appropriate? And I kind of brought that topic to you, and you were like, yeah, I would never. Like, we just don't. Fuck that. I don't even want to talk about it. I'm like, oh, well, I guess that doesn't give us much to say. But I feel like here we ended up here anyway.
Yeah. And I don't remember that because I think I would have. Well, yeah, maybe when I said that I meant for me personally. But yeah, that's where it's hard. That's why. And that's another reason I don't want that position, because when I'm in a seat, I feel like that's that person's responsibility.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, hey, man, why are you not shutting this fucking guy down?
That's so funny.
And I don't think we
blame
talk
them
about
too.
that. Yeah, that's who's supposed to be in charge of that shit.
Right.
And if I was sitting up there, I would feel like that was my responsibility, like
I have sat in many meetings where somebody is sharing too long about something that I feel like is definitely not recovery appropriate. And I am always like, my first thought is, what the fuck, secretary? And then my second thought is, I can't believe this fucking home group. I can't believe they wouldn't come over and shut this motherfucker down. Right. Knowing damn well when it's my turn, I'm sitting there like dreading the hell out of doing
please
that.
Stop talking.
Oh
please
my
stop
God.
Talking.
Don't make me get up and come over and say something to you. Right. I don't wanna.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's so difficult, because a lot of times people, I always think their intention is good and that their heart is in the right place. But it's like when you're impaired, it's different. Not different. I think your heart might still be in the right place, but your intellectual capacity isn't where it should be. So, like say with my friend, it's like you can tell like what he's saying is just off. Like it almost doesn't make sense. Like it makes sense, but it's like, this is some shit. And when it's a subject though, it's a little different, whether it's somebody's religious beliefs or something like that. That feels a little different. This episode has been brought to you in part by Voices of Hope, Inc., a nonprofit recovery organization made up of people in recovery, family members, and allies. Together, members strive to protect the dignity of those that use drugs and those in recovery by advocating for treatment, harm reduction and support resources, and mentoring. Please visit us at www.voicesofhopemaryland.org and consider donating to our cause.
Well, and maybe this is the point where we talk about, like, when do you think about even considering shutting somebody down? Like, is there a thing that's worth making somebody stop talking for? And I don't know what that would be, right? Is it because they're high? Is it because the subject material? Is it because they shared that they've used today? Like, what is your description of the right kind of scenario?
Or people that come into specifically in like an NA meeting and talk about being on a maintenance program or how much that saved their life or how great that is for them. Or they talk about their recovery house and how great their recovery house is, or their treatment center and how great the treatment center is. It's like all that stuff is always, to me, like right on that line of,
Right.
And it's, I guess that's the point of when you're in a home group and having that group conscience and electing that person to chair the meeting. Like, that's the importance of considering that position. I don't think we do that a lot. I know I don't. We get in the home group, we all get together and go, hey, who wants to run the meeting? Oh, okay. Dave. Yep. Dave, run the meeting. Sounds good. Thanks. Appreciate it. I don't want to do it.
To do it. Right.
So, and then Dave does it, and, we haven't even talked about any of that stuff, or if they have the willingness or ability to shut someone down.
Right. And sit up there with like 9 months clean and have a 15-year member talking some dumb shit in the back.
Right.
Like, do I really
about
feel like
I
can
found
tell
Jesus.
them? Right. Can I really tell that person to stop talking?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I couldn't do it.
So let's see. Things that have bothered me over the years when I've heard them in meetings. Definitely when people just, I feel like, share about irrelevant shit. That's what bothers me more than anything, I think, when they're just like babbling on and I'm like not connected to the conversation and it doesn't feel like it's got a storyline and it's not necessarily going anywhere. I'm
Right.
like, what the fuck are we listening to? Like, I don't know. I guess from my point in time today, the biggest problem is disconnection. Like, that's what comes to mind for me. Like, what has us all here together on the edge of our seat having the same experience? And then what has us all kind of starting to space out and tune out and do whatever? Like, but that's not something I would think you should shut it down for. It's just
and
not
that's
working.
so subjective, I think, because
Is it though?
yeah,
Is it?
I think so.
I don't know that it's as subjective as you think it is.
Because I think you could have a very entertaining speaker, someone who's good at engaging a crowd and good at speaking, share about some really irrelevant shit. I mean, I don't know. I've been to conventions or big meetings where people just rattle off a bunch of cliches loudly and the fucking crowd has gone wild, and I'm like, this is not really saying anything. I mean, it's almost like our cliches episode when it's like when you look at most of those cliches, they aren't
If you don't
all
pick
that
it up,
deep.
it won't get in you.
Right. And it's like if you just yell that real loud with, stay clean no matter what, people fucking get all into it. And that's just me. I mean, they're all connected. But I don't know. For me, one of the things, and it isn't always specifically the subject as much as how people say things, Like if I was to go into a meeting and say something like, for my experience, and I know this isn't for everybody, but like I didn't come through a treatment center or anything. I just came to NA meeting, stay clean that day, and that worked for me. For some people, they go to a treatment center. If they say, I needed to go to a treatment center, and they're sort of vague and they're not specific, but it's like, there's a way to do that without going, oh, I went to Ashley, and when I did Ashley, it was great because we had a chef and they gave us all this food and, it was really nice and we got this great support and they took us to these outside meetings and, we went to AA and NA and then they had therapy, and then you're talking all about the fucking treatment center and you're not really sharing about recovery in general. To me, that's always kind of off.
Yeah, but is it worth stopping somebody for?
Depends on how long they want to talk about their treatment center.
I mean, so what do you think qualifies? And what benefit do you feel you gain? So you've mentioned a few things so far. Like this guy you're talking about, the original story, he was drunk, right, at the meeting. But you also mentioned that he's like trying to say what he thinks NA's message is or what he thinks recovery's message is or something helpful, even though you don't think necessarily that he agrees with it or is living it at the moment. But I don't know that that's something I could if I use that as a qualification for shutting people down, I feel like you're shutting everybody down that's got less than 2 years because that's exactly what all of us were doing was spouting some NA shit that somebody else said that we thought we believed.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there criteria there or is it just if someone's, I mean, in this case, I think it more has to do with, like, he's literally slurring his speech to the point where, like, he's drunk. And it's
maybe this is the opportune time because we're always talking about, like, this, we talked about it last week, this purity test of clean and how we're monitoring sort of each other and this big fear that if we don't keep the 12-step environment pure, something bad will happen, right? Like if there's high people leading the meeting, newcomers might get high as well and die or something. I think that's the fear that we're all worried about, I'm guessing. But like maybe this is the time to interview newcomers that go to that meeting you're talking about that he's at and say, hey, how does it affect you that this guy is doing this? Like, what is that? Does it make you feel like you want to go out and do it? Or, you know what I mean? Kind of get some inside input because we always say that's the fear is the newcomer hearing that person. Well, let's ask the newcomer. Does that bother
and
you?
I never think of it as the newcomer specifically. I think of it as anybody. Like that's the way I always looked at it. Like, I know we sort of say that, like with a bunch of clean time, people are supposed to be better, but I don't exempt myself from the desire or compulsion to use on any given day.
Okay, well, does it make you want to use because he slurs his speech at the meeting?
No, but it's also like, I wouldn't go to church and then start talking about the Buddha a bunch either. Like, it's just not the appropriate place or the appropriate environment for that. Like there's a place for that. It's not here. And even if like I'll hang out and talk with him after the meeting, even that's fine. Or if he wanted to go get something to eat, I'd probably go get something to eat with him,
Right.
But in the meeting, during the meeting, just doesn't feel appropriate. It doesn't seem like that's the best thing.
I guess it would be the way you described that right there. To me, that would be more relevant if he was in there saying like, "Oh my God, Jim Beam, that's the answer. That's fucking step 13.
Yeah.
Y'all got to get on or whatever. Step 0.5. Everybody needs to drink. It feels great." Like it's not like he's in there attempting to deliver a non-NA message. Like it might not be the NA message he necessarily is living or believing, but he's trying and attempting to give the right information.
So in his case, yes. In the maintenance programs, though, that's what that message feels like. You know what I mean? Like that's where that one gets a little hairy, because we've had that. I've been in meetings where people are like, "Yeah, I'm on, methadone, and it's great. It's working great for me." And it's like, "Oh yeah, that's the same as someone saying, 'Oh yeah, well I just drink wine now, and that's good for me, and I can do that.'"
I wonder though. I feel like after the fact, we'd all be okay. Right? So like somebody's up there and they're like celebrating their second year and they're like, "Yeah, my path," just like you would share, "My path wasn't through a detox center." They would say, "My path was through a Suboxone maintenance program for a while to detox down." That's not everybody's story. Like, I feel like we'd all be like, "Oh, great. That's a beautiful NA message. Thanks."
Yeah.
But if they're in the middle of it and they're like, "Yeah, I'm on Suboxone. I'm working on tapering down. I'm hoping one day to be off of that," we would be like, "Oh, why are you sharing in our meeting? You don't have anything."
I don't know. See, that I would be okay. Like that, I feel like is, I don't know. Me personally, that wouldn't bother me so much. But
what if they didn't say they were tapering down? What if they just said I'm on Suboxone and it's going well?
Yeah, that would be different. I mean, again, that's just me. And I don't know that I would shut them down specifically. But I guess I'm thinking more back to this idea that the drunk person sharing is the problem. And I don't know if that's going to cause someone to want to use. I don't know if that is the fear for me. The fear for me more has to do with the integrity of the fellowship and the program. And it's the same with people on maintenance. I don't have anything against people that are on a maintenance program and want to be on a maintenance program. And if they needed a fucking ride to the clinic, I'd probably even give them a ride if they were a friend of mine. You know what I mean? Like I would support them in that journey. But in the NA meeting, like we have all these readings that say, we're a program of complete abstinence from all drugs. This is why we're doing this, is because we have this addiction problem. And when we use, it leads us to this chaotic lifestyle that we don't want to live anymore. And, all those things that we read those readings say. And then when you have people come in that are, drunk or talking about a maintenance program and no one in the meeting is really shutting them down or just making that like, "Oh, that's completely okay too." Like what message does that send to the new person? Like how much integrity do we have in this abstinence thing? How much importance is there really? Are we staying clean? Is it okay to smoke weed? Is it okay to, be on a maintenance program? Is it okay to just drink and not do other drugs? Like, it starts to get blurry if we're not consistent in our message of what we're doing there. That's where I think it gets a little more dangerous than the specific hearing a drunk person and thinking that you're going to go get drunk or high.
It's interesting. Integrity as a program or as a fellowship, I don't know. I'm trying to think through that idea. I feel like the integrity is in self, right? Like my integrity is that I am doing what I say I'm doing. Not so much like our program has to. It'd be more like fidelity, I guess. Everybody's looking the same. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know that the program or a group has an integrity. That's kind of an interesting concept. I'm not saying it can't. I don't know how we would enforce NA's integrity. You know what I mean? Yeah,
and I guess where the enforcement part is where it gets tricky, because we have those traditions that are supposed to sort of keep us along the right path, but they seem to only work if everyone's following them. Like when you have a few rogue people that are doing other things. It's like, what do you do with those rogue people that, like how do you manage them in a way that keeps everyone else on the same path?
Right, because the traditions aren't, as we discovered going through all of them, they're not a legal system. They're not a system of laws and a system of punishments for if those laws are broken. Like, they're just ideas and, hey,
and
these are nice.
As you and I found, just looking for a couple minutes trying to find anything about what you would do with a person that was using and sharing in a meeting. There's nothing in any of our literature and in anything in, AA literature that I could find. There's nothing easily available that's like, oh yeah, if a person's using in a meeting and they want to share, this is what you do.
Right.
There's not that.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist.
It's definitely a challenge. One of the things this brought up for me, which is going back to that idea I was telling you earlier, like this disconnection versus connection idea. And from the strangest of places, my mother's boyfriend of like 12 years passed away a week ago. And so we ended up at the funeral yesterday. And so we're in this funeral and, I'm already like, fucking funerals. Like, it's not the kind of shit I want to be at. It's just dreary and awful. But you go in there and then they start in with the guy reading out of the Bible and, doing his thing. I guess it's a sermon of some sort. And everybody's just kind of sitting there like whatever, sort of half spaced out, right? But then they had two people come up and share, meaningful events and connections from this guy's life. And I guess one of those is the eulogy and one was just another person who wanted to get up and share. And they were both so perfect and beautiful, right? And like, everybody in the fucking place has tears in their eyes and we're all like connected and sharing our grief together. It was like I was like, holy fuck, I have never had this experience that like this is exactly what a funeral is supposed to be. Like, we're supposed to be grieving together. And that's what it felt like. And then the second share ended and the pastor, reverend, whatever he was, got back up and started talking again. And within a minute, all dry eyes, everybody disconnected again. And I'm not trying to shit on the Bible. That is not the goal here, right? It's not about the Bible. I guess for me, and this kind of took place at the last two funerals I've been at, they just didn't feel like the Bible felt authentic, right? I'm not saying the person didn't believe in God and didn't think they were going to heaven and didn't follow Jesus, but they never talked about that around me. Right? Like, that was never a conversation we had. I never heard those words come out of their mouth at any point in time. And I've been around these people for a while. So to me, it just feels so, if you had somebody that was highly involved in your church and they passed away, like, everybody would probably feel connected and comforted by Bible verses or whatever else. But this wasn't a particularly religious event. And it just felt so just looking at that idea of like, damn, there are ways we can come together and really feel connected and united depending on what's being said in the environment and what's not. And it was just so drastic. And for everybody to like connect and then disconnect so quickly, depending on what was being, talked about, I was like, damn, that kind of feels like it makes a lot of sense for this episode. Because, it's not so much that what they're sharing that I'm scared of what it's going to do or integrity. Like, for me, it's just, is everybody spacing out and starting to check their fucking Facebook again? Because we've lost the fucking meeting at that point.
Right,
the point is for us to be here and connect. But going into that too, and I'm, about to shut up and let you talk a little because I'm getting dry. This idea that I feel like, I've gone over it before. When I came to a meeting, there was 30 people in the meeting and 27 of them had more than 6 months, right? And then, towards later points in my recovery, it's a meeting of 55 people and, 26 of them have never been there before because they just got to recovery this week. And it's like this shift in size and senior members or whatever. And you have 26 people coming in more interested in being on their phones. They're already part of this disconnection of the meeting. So like, how does that impact the whole meeting atmosphere? And is there going to be more kind of rogue shares if that's going on and people aren't connected? Because when you're connected, you're responding to what the last share was. You know what I mean? You're kind of riffing off of that. You're a part of the whole.
Yeah. And all those things, again, just bring up to me why it is important that we have a chairperson or a home group or a group conscience that addresses some of those issues. I mean, I feel like if I was in a meeting where I had a whole bunch of people that were new from a treatment center or recovery house coming a lot, maybe I'll do a speaker meeting. Maybe I'll do something else to try to control, try to keep the focus where it needs to be. Yeah, it's tough. We want to have an atmosphere of recovery. I'm a big person that if I go to a meeting and it has a topic, I'm going to share about the topic, whether I have some personal shit going on. I mean, if it was really like life or death personal shit, I might share about it. But most of the time, I try to keep what I'm saying relevant to the topic because I feel like that helps, at least tries to protect this integrity, protect this connection. This is what we're all talking about today. And we can feel connected and unified in that, whereas you got different people sharing about different stuff. In the past, I have felt differently about that, though. I used to have a home group. We didn't have a topic or anything. You came in, you shared about what was going on with you in your life. And at that point, I just felt like it was more relevant for me in my recovery to know, like, how are you really doing this? What are you really doing in your life? And how are you applying this shit, like, at your job and with your wife and with your kids? And what are you doing outside of these meetings? Because I can read, oodles of information about whatever, spirituality and how to, be honest and practice these principles. But what's that really look like when you're living at your job? When you're at your job and you're in a situation where somebody gives you too much change, like, what does that shit look like?
Yeah, I guess, if we get down to the actual doing of this task, though, the actual shutting someone down in a meeting, I don't know what benefit happens from that, right? I feel like there's going to be unintended consequences. I feel like there's probably some better practices to try to not alienate this person, from the group in trying to get them to stop sharing. And yet I still feel like once you start the process of I'm going to try to stop them from sharing, you don't know what's going to happen. And it doesn't matter how good your compassionate practices are. This person might be in a place where, they're already giving clues that their reaction is not going to be all that great because they're not really all in the right place.
Is there a good way or is there a better way to try to shut someone down? Or is it better to just not really do it? I mean, ever's a strong word because you could have somebody who's completely off the rails doing whatever and you do have to kind of be like, hey, excuse me.
Right.
But most of the time, let's say with this guy even, because he never goes too awful long and it's just, like say, it's just like a drunk person talking for a couple minutes. Would it be maybe better as either the home group or as an individual, one of us that knows him well, because some other guys in the home group know him pretty well too, to do that after the meeting or aside and say, hey, look, man, we know you've been struggling. We want you to keep coming back, but if you've been using that day, maybe don't share, maybe try to wait till you get a day or try to wait till you're sober to come in and share, because we'd really rather have you and hear from you, not the intoxicated you. And is there a nicer way to do that? Because that's just sounded mean at the end.
I don't know that there's a nicer way to do it. I do think one-on-one's probably preferred to end the event itself, but I feel like usually after the event itself, it's kind of like, it's fucking over now. I don't want to. I guess if it was a regular pattern like this, like I haven't seen too many regular patterns.
No, this is a new one for me. I got to be honest.
Yeah, usually you see something like this and you're like outside of your area, or it's a person who's never been there before and never comes back.
Well, and what's funny is it didn't come up in our conversation like when him and I were talking, because it was just me personally, I was leaning on him to try to get back into treatment. I think that's what he needs, but that's just whatever. But I didn't use that opportunity to say, when we were talking about him drinking in the meetings, like I didn't use that opportunity to say, hey, you shouldn't be doing that. Don't share when you come into meetings drunk. Like it just didn't feel like the right timing.
Right.
It was a different conversation, but I put it on myself. Like I didn't use that opportunity that he brought it up to say, you probably shouldn't be doing this anyway. So don't put it on me to correct you. You need to correct yourself.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of fascinating because I feel like that might have been, and depends, because I might have been caught off guard by that phone call too. But like it does feel like one of those times you could just say something like, if he said to me, why aren't you shutting me down in the meeting? That's the right thing to do. I'd be like, well, why are you talking then?
Right.
Like, if you don't think it's the right thing to do, why are you opening your mouth?
Well, and I will say, too, there is that part of me as a member in recovery that has that old school, like, this person's using, I should just try to shut this conversation down and get off this phone because this is a bunch of irrelevant nonsense. And I don't know that that's true, but that feeling comes right away, when I'm like, oh, he's drunk. This is stupid.
Right.
But I just use the opportunity to say the things that I feel like I would say if he wasn't drunk, and whether he hears it or not is not really up to me. But then I do try to find at some point to get off the phone, because what ends up happening, or at least with this particular individual, is he starts saying all the same shit all over again. The exact same things all over again. I'm like, I don't want to hear this 4 times, in a 40-minute conversation that really was a 5-minute conversation 5 times.
So this is a shitty question, but I'm going to say it anyway. So what happens if a guy like this, or this guy, they end up on heroin and they come to the meeting and they're doing this pattern, but every time they share, they nod out like 25 seconds into it. So then you wait like 15 seconds and you're like, well, that's how we'll get past it. We'll just let somebody else share. But then they keep coming back to the story every time they wake up. Do you have to shut them down like multiple times? Like,
I've never had that.
Yeah,
that would be interesting.
That would be fucked up.
Yeah.
I actually think I have kind of seen something like that, but they didn't finish the story. They just kept waking up with a few words and then going back to bed.
Yeah. Well, and there's always been people that talk out of turn at meetings like that, but that always seems so random. Like, usually nowadays I'm a little forgiving when I'm like, oh, it's just a brand new person that's not been like, they don't know the culture, they don't know the environment. They'll figure it out if they keep coming back. Now isn't the opportunity to push them out, and that I feel like is very different. That I feel like is, like, at least for me personally, like, I'm a little more tolerant of that. The difference with this situation is this is an individual that's been heavily involved. He was in service. He, he, for lack of a better word, like, he knows better, like, he knows the expectations and the environment and the culture. So it's not a surprise that he shouldn't think that that's okay.
Well, his brain knows better, but I wonder. And this could go 2 ways, right? With the nervous system, just thinking about, like, if the alcohol calms his nervous system more, that might make it easier for him to hear things in that moment.
Yeah.
But then if it's the opposite and he's in survival mode, it doesn't matter if he knows better or not, because he's not going to have access to that kind of thinking.
Well, and as my friend, what I keep trying to get to him, and I can't ever get a good answer, is like, well, what are you looking for? Like, do you want to be abstinent or do you not? Like, if you don't, then that's okay too. Like, I'm not here to judge any of that. But if you want to be abstinent and here doing this, then there's some things you got to do, And if you don't, that's fine. I'll still be your friend, but this is weird. Like, you're in the middle of 2 things.
So is there a time to shut somebody down in a meeting? I'm sure, like you said, I don't want to never say never, because there's always a weird situation. You never know. But I don't see me shutting anybody down in a meeting.
Yeah, it would be really rare. I'm probably more apt to do it now than I ever was, only because I have a little more, whatever you want to call it, like integrity and self-worth, where I feel like if I were to do it, I would feel okay with that decision. But as far as 5 years, 10 years ago, I would have never. It would have just never happened. And it wouldn't even matter what they were doing.
I feel like there was a way better chance of getting me to shut somebody down 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Because I definitely would have bought into some kind of integrity that you're talking about, of NA or fidelity or whatever we'd like to refer to it as. But I just don't feel like I do anymore.
Oh.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Say whatever the fuck you want. I ain't here to tell you not to. I don't know what the hell's supposed to be said or not. I ain't the master of that. I can't picture it, but there's just so many. I feel like for every case you could give me where I'd be like, oh, yeah, that might need to be shut down, I would see another case of a person not high and just sharing some similar shit, and I'd be like, but I would let them do that. So I'm like, I've heard so much shitty stuff out of people that are clean, in recovery, working steps. I'm like, I don't know. I don't shut none of that shit down. Why would I do it for anybody else?
Yeah. And I guess that's the importance of a good chairperson. Think about who your chair people are in your meetings.
Yeah.
Ask them, You know, what do you think protects the integrity of the group?
Yeah. What?
It's an interesting conversation.
It is. And I feel like we all would have a different answer of like what's allowable or what needs to go or what's not helping us connect in an atmosphere of recovery. But I would be interested in like more chair people or secretaries' answers. Like what would it be to you? Where do you draw your line? And what does that mean to you? How do you judge when to say something and how do you say it? I'd be curious.
And I think that all gets back to the autonomy of the groups, autonomy of the meetings, and what different groups want to be, you know, what kind of atmosphere you're trying to have.
Awesome. So go out there and feel safe in the knowledge that you can share whatever fucking nonsense you want, and I will not shut you up. Have a good week. Did you like this episode? Share it with people you think might get something out of it. Check out the rest of our episodes at recoverysortof.com. Also, while you're there, you can find ways to link up with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, YouTube, anything. We're always looking for new ideas. Got an idea you want us to look into? Reach out to us.